Serious, ex-prisoners of Reddit. Who was the most evil person there, and what did they do that was so bad? Was in jail for a year. Girl who slept next to me smothered her infant child to death in a Five Guys bathroom because she thought the devil was going to come take him. She looked like a sweet woman, but was an unstable religious fanatic. She thought she could get away with an insanity plea as well. Another one let her boyfriend kill her son, beat him to death and hung his dead body up because a little boy danced to music and the boyfriend thought he was gay. Oh dear god, that's horrific. The child P guy. He was seemingly normal, which I assume meant it was drugs or something. That's why I was there. I became friends through playing chess with him and he was pretty socially skilled and intelligent. One day I realized that I hadn't asked him what his charges were, and he said he was in a chat room and accidentally clicked on a link that downloaded one picture of a little girl, and said his IP got traced and he got 5 years for it. I had someone on the outside look him up, and he not only had over 100 counts of possession of child P, but multiple counts of distribution and manufacturing of child pornography. After confronting him about it, he denied it and I separated from him completely. Side note, other people found out and fricked him up. I thought about it but didn't want to add time to my sentence. Now, I've made some mistakes in my life with drugs and stealing, but child pornography or anything to do with children or taking advantage of someone sexually disgusts me to my core. Not only is what he did evil, thinking about how socially normal he seemed at first still makes me squirm today. Frick that guy and anyone who does what he does. I wasn't in prison, but my mom spent 15 years in one. She was at a women's only prison. Since it was either that or she got sent to a different state. Where I live we only have 2 prisons that are in practice. My mo told me stories though, so there were a lot of women who killed their babies and stuff, or went crazy and killed their partners. My mom was the beige suits W the public of the prison, and not with the people in the ad seg. She told me about some crazy people she talked to though. Most were chill, in on some drug felony like my mom, but then there was this one lady who wouldn't talk to anyone, and baked and ate her 8-month-old. Pretty sick. I used to work the 5 AM shift at a popular gym, and I had a women's CO who worked the night shift who would come in to work out and tan after work. Lord, the stories she told about the crazy ladies. Like one was pregnant and was regularly trying to slam herself into the ground to kill it. She was mentally ill. A woman I was acquainted with in the facility I was in allegedly microwaved her child. Another woman killed her parents. A good friend of mine was forced, by her husband, to dispose of her sister's body after her husband had raped and murdered her. You don't ask why are you here. They'll tell you if they want you to know. Microwave her child. Either it's a very small world or this is a more common crime than I had ever thought. A couple women who had murdered their abusive partners. One of them had a couple kids that had died of SIDS, but I don't believe for a minute she didn't kill them, but she was never charged with it. The doctor would tell the girls that it was mandatory for them to have a pelvic exam. Not a strip search but a full-on internal exam. Only the cute young ones of course. Chick who was charged with murder because her husband tortured her sister to death in the basement with her in the house and she didn't do anything. I learned something in school about how SIDS can't be diagnosed. It's just a blanket term for infant suffocation, meaning many cases of SIDS could be cases of infanticide and we have no way of really knowing. I wonder if things have changed since then, but it's something that stuck with me since I heard about it. While it is impossible to know everyone while I was incarcerated with John DuPont, made famous by Steve Carell in the movie Foxcatcher. He gave off a very creepy vibe. I definitely think there were some severely evil thoughts in that man. While not a big person, he just had an aura about him. The best way I could put it would be a creepy Mr. Rogers. Yes, I stole that from Demolition Man. While he was ruled mentally ill, and no, I'm not a psychiatrist, there didn't seem to be any sort of mental illness about him in the few years I knew him. Never a prison but a social worker for CPS. I had a mom who was a prostitute and this guy that she was meeting up with liked kids too. Mom brought her 4-year-old daughter to a motel in her bathing suit and basically told the man, here you go. They were both arrested obviously. The most disturbing part was that she didn't see what the big deal was. Her daughter would have to learn the way of the world somehow. That one stuck with me. I was in jail for public intoxication once. Small town, no room in the drunk tank, so they put me in with the rest of the folk. I was still somewhat drunk and chatty. I struck up a conversation with a guy that had instant coffee. I made a trade to give him my pancakes when breakfast came around in exchange for some coffee he had right then. I was temporary, I would be out by morning, so I didn't care about breakfast. We drank coffee and talked. I asked him why he was there and he tried to convince me that he was innocent of what he was charged. They charged him with drowning a pregnant woman in a popular swimming hole near our town. The more he told me, the more I was convinced that he took her out there to have sex. She wouldn't, probably because she was early in the pregnancy, so he got angry and drowned her in a jeep. Just knocked her out and pushed it in the river with her unconscious or dead inside. While I was talking to that guy, I was recognized by someone I hadn't seen on a really long time. I asked him why he was in jail and he said, I set my trailer on fire with my wife in it. Not a fun night. Wasn't a prison but was taken into jail when I got caught driving with a suspended license. Was in a 6x4 holding cell before you actually get into the jail. I was with another older guy. He asked me what I did, I told him. I then asked him what he did. Turns out he kidnapped an older guy, tied him up in his basement along a pole and beat him up. He ended up giving the guy a smoke after beating him up while still tied up. The guy with the smoke ended up starting the house on fire and that's how the perp was caught. I didn't ask any more questions and was released a couple hours after and haven't been back since. I spent some time in prison, tutoring inmates for the GED. Most of them had made some bad decisions but I didn't meet anyone truly evil. My brother raped our cousin. He makes $400k a year now. Our cousin is dead. I'd say my brother is evil. This will get buried, but that's an easy one. The prison where I processed had an old guy who was in there for some particularly heinous stuff. With the help of his wife and another woman, he ran a daycare. At this daycare, the three of them not only molested the children and forced them to perform sexual acts on each other, but also videotaped and distributed the videos to other sick freaks. I would like to add that they only received life sentences as a result of the videotaping and distribution of the videotapes because our laws are extremely lax on this type of crime, while drug dealers spend 15, 20, even 30 years in prison. I saw child molesters in there who only got a year or two. Unfortunately, while this guy got his comeuppance, it brought about a change in legislation that protects child molesters. You see, when other convicts found out what this guy had done, a group of them held him down, shoved a broom handle up his butt, and broke it off inside of him. For what he put those children through, I still feel this was quite lenient, and he deserved far worse. But he now stays at the processing prison because they have the adequate medical facilities to manually evacuate his bowels every day because he can't no longer defecate normally. This incident led to new hate crime laws. So here in North Carolina, it is now a felony hate crime to attack someone for the nature of their convictions, leading to an automatic 5 years added to your sentence for attacking someone due to what they have done. What this in turn has caused is a new paradigm where sex offenders are effectively safe from any kind of harm, because even if that had nothing to do with why someone beat them up, all they have to do is say the person attacked them because of their crime, and that person will automatically get another 5 years added, 5 years added, 5 now. At least here in NC, it's easy to spot the child molesters, because they are the ones who stand in a circle on the yard singing hymns and doing Bible studies, and attend every religious ceremony, leading to the people who would otherwise go to the church services abstaining from them because they have no desire to be around that scum. As for old Larry, the man who got sodomized by a broomstick, as well as all of those who committed similar crimes, they are safe. Unfortunately, I was locked up for 12 years 8 months and I could go forever with stories. Probably the most evil bastard was a young guy who sodomized an infant until he died. We tortured the frick out of him until he begged for protective custody. Oh, and of course Craig Price, the 13-year-old serial killer, was in jail with a volunteer fireman who got charged with 47 counts of arson. He mostly targeted abandoned buildings but also burned down several inhabited houses, a daycare during business hours, and an animal shelter. He wasn't remorseful at all and was absolutely cold-hearted towards his victims. I was in for my 4th misdemeanor pot possession and this guy was my bunkmate. I think the people who run the prison system are the most cold-hearted people of all. When I was in, they put a small framed kid who just turned 18 in the cell with a convicted sexual predator who was very dangerous and HIV positive. The kid was in for minor theft charges. They allowed that sick frick to rape that kid and give him HIV. They knew he would attempt to rape anyone they put in the cell with him, and they put one of the most vulnerable person in there. The US prison system is akin to human trafficking because they profit from each individual that's incarcerated. If that isn't one of the worst things that happens today, I don't know what is. The land of the free has more people incarcerated per capita than any other country on earth. Oh my god, they ruined that kid's chances. He won't rehabilitate. Former TDCJ correctional officer, for a very short period of time. I currently work as a consultant and am in and out of prisons all over the country just about every week. At TDC, offenders used to have these things called travel cards where we could read about the nature of their crimes. I refused to ever read them. I didn't want to know why offenders were there. We were frequently told to be firm, fair, and consistent. Another thing we always got told was to make sure an offender always had exactly what they were supposed to have, nothing more and nothing less. So if they were supposed to have a second pillow and didn't, we were supposed to give it to them. Someone told me about one of our offenders one time. This guy raped his 2-year-old daughter. He cut off her feet and eventually killed her. My daughter at the time I heard this story was 4. When she is afraid of something, she immediately clings to me for protection. I am her father. In my daughter's eyes, that's what I do. I protect her. I didn't have to teach her to cling to me. I couldn't imagine this 2-year-old girl living in a world so dark that the person she was supposed to instinctively cling to for protection was raping her. That the person she was wired to love automatically was cutting off her feet. Who else does she turn to when that is happening? I never wanted to read the cards because I would never be able to give an offender what they were supposed to have, knowing some crap like that. I heard of one other offender that lost his temper and slammed his 3-year-old son's head into the concrete floor so many times that the head reportedly turned to mush. I cut off the person telling that story and told him I didn't want to know more or which offender it was. That first guy is probably the most evil in my book. Brother of mine was in juvie when he was 14. His cellmate was an 11-year-old who was in there because he slit the neighbor's dog's throat for barking so much. I worked at a state women's prison as a guard. Most women there were there for drug-related charges, so nothing crazy. But the women there for the worst crime was a deaf woman who decided to chop up her wife with a chainsaw while she was sleeping. The most fricked up thing about it is since she was deaf, she didn't even hear the screams or pain she was causing. I've been in contact with a guy who got his ex-military cousin hooked on H, then terrorized and killed him out of pure badness. Him and another guy strangled and stabbed him, then cut his head off. My man went on a 3 or 4 day drink and coke binge sitting out the back of their apartments kicking the guy's head around like a football. I was also a few feet away when a hitman who was in for lining 4 guys up and shooting them all in the head was attacked and had his throat cut. You're asking about evil, but these guys behave normally in jail. The first keeps his head down. The second has grandchildren visit him every week even though he's doing a 35 years bit and will never be released. My dad told about a guy he met called Kaluga, which is a reference to a local sweet candy. This guy was a robber since his 13 and got caught at 20 for an intended robbery with a gun. When he was released 10 years later, he went and killed the cop that caught him and got another 10 years. What's crazy is that despite those horrid events, he is always a nice and cordial person. Another story my dad told me was about this guy that killed his wife and ate her. He also murdered his daughter. It's a rumor that when he was caught by detectives he was making soup with his daughter's meat. Creepy as frick. I went to county jail. It was an eye-opening experience. The inmates were generally pretty decent. Most were just there because of a moment of stupidity. Others were there because they suffered from mental health issues. The evil people were the COs. Their behavior was horrific and disgusting. Jail is designed to strip your humanity and COs are the enforcers of this paradigm. I've never been to prison jail, but I got my ex locked up for a bit for assaulting me, and because he was from out of state, had to sit his happy butt in county for 90 days due to being a flight risk. For context, he shoved me so hard, I flipped over the back of a couch into a table, shoved me into a door bruising my back on the doorknob, then slammed my face up against a mirror so hard it gave me a nosebleed that wouldn't stop. He told me later, because of course I talked to him again, right? What a freaking catch. That he thought he was in there for nothing. There were dudes on the same floor in there for beating their girls bloody with pipes and already talking about how bad they were gonna beat them when they got out. How I should consider myself lucky cause those girls are gonna die when those guys get out. Please don't worry y'all. I'm alive, married to an actual son and living my best life and haven't heard from this dude in almost 9 years. You do not have to justify putting away someone who assaulted you. You do not have to give examples of his bad behavior. You take good care of yourself. I was sharing cell with a guy named Mike for 5 years. That dude told me he had some sort of brain DMG, so he could not feel emotions. We was on gardening, and suddenly I hear people screaming, and when I run to Mike he had blood all over his face. Apparently he smacked down another dude for looking at him and bit his freaking tongue off. 2 weeks later when he got back to our cell and I asked why, he just said that he heard that's what you were supposed to do if people look at you in prison lol. Funny man. I never went to jail or anything, but my mother is jail for murdering my little brother. He had Down syndrome and one time he wouldn't stop crying so she covered him with a pillow until he suffocated to death. She kept him in his crib for a week until the police came to her house for something completely unrelated and found his body. I have PTSD from her and I don't know if I'll ever truly recover. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night screaming his name. His name is Eli. I slept next to a dude that brutally murdered a 3-year-old boy. Beat the child to death. Matthew Moat was the boy's name. Don't Google it if you want to sleep tonight. I was taught to play cards by a man that killed 2 women in a robbery with his wife as the co-defendant. His name was Martin Woolley. I went to classes with a guy that murdered 2 people execution style at 16. He was in his 40s when I met him and I thought it had mellowed. He'd murdered 2 other people inside and beaten both cases. Talked about it at dinner like it was nothing. He seemed pretty evil. I only knew him as Big Shorty. I saw 2 guys hold a younger dude in his 20s hand in a steel door and then slammed it. Broke the bones in the back of his hand. The couple's I believe. He screamed and melted to the floor. One of the guys holding him kicked him while he lay crying in the floor. He seemed pretty evil. One of them was Rooster maybe? Oh frick it. Isn't that enough? Do I win something for living through the presence of this evil? I know what it looks like now. I mean, people say he's evil and I look at him and go no, that's just a run-of-the-mill butthole. There are many of those. Evil, real evil, is harder to come by and I pray you know it when it's close. I was in San Benito County Jail in Gen Pop. We all heard through a gang member who regularly received kites, prison notes passed person to person through doors, in courtrooms, eventually arriving at the desired individual. And one time we heard news of a guy in protective custody who raped an infant to death. I also heard one night an unholy squealing coming through the air vents. I'm not one to jump to conclusions, but I'm sure that motherfucker was getting butt fucked. Bob Barker ain't saving you this time buddy. R.I.P. I've been an inmate 5 different prisons. At each place I found it was the guards. Not all of them though. Some just wanted a paycheck. Some wanted to actually help people. Then you have the people that come in and do everything they can to make your life a living heck. I've seen guards sexually assault inmates, beat them, starve them, turn families away for visits, some driving as much as 4 hours one way. Every prison has its bad inmates. The serial killers, the pedophiles, the crazy people, the gang members, but for the most part they don't bother anybody unless you deserve to be bothered. They might have done some bad crap to get themselves in there, but just because you lost a few screws in your head and killed people doesn't mean they were stabbing other prisoners every chance they get. The guards, referring to the bad ones, are the ones who come in and take it out on us when we haven't done anything to them. When people get sent to these places and put in some type of effort to better themselves, the guards take whatever they can from you and degrade you until you don't even feel worthy of being human. To me that's evil. I know a guy who's currently in prison and he says they don't talk about what they're in for, just how much time they're serving, and that generally people leave each other alone. He's never said a word about the guards and I'm hesitant to ask since I know that our letters can be read. Peter DeConnick or Chris Powell were pretty ghoulish humans, but there was a guy named Randy who beat a woman to death in her own home, covered her body with a blanket, took a bunch of her anxiety medication, watched TV for a day or two and then called a guy named Mez, also in jail, and tried to trade her TV for crack. Well, I'm not an ex-prisoner, but I used to work in prison and worst one I remember is a guy in his 20s had raped, murdered and violated the body grave. Not sure about this. In Finland, the term is quite open, but ranges from doing something awful to unburied body to violating the grave. Didn't want to know what he had done. Worst part is, he was one of those guys who seemed quite innocent and normal guy, which made me realize that any random person I see, regardless of what he/she it looks like, because that kind of stuff really doesn't matter. This is from a friend who was locked for fraud with Isaac Donko aka Young Diz. I think it was an HMP Belmarsh. The guy kidnapped a youth and stripped him naked, cut his hair, got some 14-year-olds to beat him with poles and poured boiling water on him, while the youth's parents were on the phone, just because he didn't want to go cunch for him to sell drugs. He's a rapper as well, known for one of the most sickening verses about a dead 14-year-old boy. They took 2 of my tunes down. CJ's mum kept shedding tears. Somebody tell her I don't give a frick that her son ain't here. Ever since her son got dropped, the whole block ain't gained. Some man in London are so washed. I worked prisons as an auxiliary staff member and found out there are undesirables that society rejects due to drugs and rather petty crime, and then there are true monsters who roam this earth. The sexual sadists are the worst because they truly enjoy hurting people for the sake of the act itself. The victims are never quite the same and live in fear for the rest of their lives. I was in jail, not prison, several times, and most of the inmates were cool. Not saying they didn't deserve to be in jail, but there was genuine camaraderie. The COs were the evil ones. They would deny us things like soap to wash with, make us ask 3 times when we were out of toilet paper, that kind of thing. I talked to one of the COs about it and he said they're insecure. He said that as a CO you have to have a certain level of confidence and inner belief in order to tell another grown man what to do. Some of the COs didn't have this and the way it came out was bullying. So yeah, the real evil is in the jailers, not the captives. I also generally think adverse selection applied here. Basically, the type of people who apply here are the type prone to this. Most of the COs from my high school class were guys with failed ambitions to be a cop and a tendency towards abusive authority. I was in jail on and off for 10 years for selling large amounts of drugs. There was a serial rapist who killed a 2-year-old girl. I don't know how long he was sentenced for, but his cellmate killed him in the night. There were a few genuinely bad ones. One in particular stands out. This guy was in for some serious violent crime. Normally murderers and rapists get housed in SHU, special housing unit, basically solitary confinement for people who can't safely be around others, but for some reason he got put into general population. Plenty of inmates talk a big game to each other about heists they pulled, women they fricked, or moving serious weight, drugs. This guy bragged about torturing and raping women. What made it even more unnerving is this creepy, massive, evil human had decided for some reason that he liked and trusted me, so he would tell me details. Apparently this time he was on trial because he had kidnapped a woman, tied her to a chair, and pulled off her ears, lips, and eyelids with pliers. I personally wasn't an inmate but visited some. While visiting on death row in AZ, there was this one inmate that really bothered me. He was molesting his niece. While doing it he crushed her cause he was so fat. Then after she died he sodomized her. When the police asked why, he said cause she couldn't tell anyone. Met the baseline killer. He is actually really nice. My ex while in jail was housed with the canal killer. My brother-in-law has been housed with 2 brothers who got off on raping and torturing little girls. He said he doesn't understand how they didn't get death. During my visitation days I have met some evil PPL. Made an account just for this. I got busted for my last DUI a few years ago. Sober from alcohol now thanks to therapy and medical marijuana. No thanks to the 4 months I spent in a Connecticut prison. One day I had a court trip. You get woken up at 3 in the morning, sit around for hours, get on a bus or van, go to other prisons to pick up other inmates, then court. All day affair. This day we were brought from our medium security prison to a maximum. In the prison bus there's 2 or 4 plastic boxes for higher level inmates. That day I got to ride about 15 feet from Stephen Hayes. Hayes and his partner Joshua Komisarjevsky beat a man nearly to death, then raped and murdered a woman and their 2 daughters. Google Cheshire, Connecticut petty murders. At the time he was in a very bad place. Other inmates were taunting him as he just stared at the floor. Never said anything. Just sitting in the plastic box, staring at the floor. Looked gaunt compared to his mugshot that had been all over the news years earlier. With a beard. That sucker, and a few child rapists, were the most evil. And again, sending a non-violent alcoholic to prison didn't make me sober. Dealing with my issues, PTSD, and getting medical marijuana did. I was in jail for 1 week violating probation, failed a drug test, weed, and I was in the same pod as Zachary Adams while he was awaiting trial. He kidnapped, raped and murdered Holly Bobo and bragged about it. I was in there for smoking weed and put in the same pod as a murderer. The justice system is fricked. Stacy Castor died shortly before I was locked up, but one that sticks out the most is a lady who left her 2 kids in a playpen with a TV set on top of a piece of plywood to keep them from crawling out while she slept for 16 hours straight. The TV collapsed, killing one of them. I was actually good friends with this girl for about a year before I learned of her crimes. Also a girl who held down a prostitute while she was beaten. Lots of sex offenses and murders. I won't ask details about crimes because I honestly didn't want to know. This guy broke into this couple's house and raped the man while the woman watched for 4 hours. Then while in court he stabbed his lawyer. The guy used to rape young white boys, hide under a bunk and when they'd lock in pop out and have his way. Correctional officer here. The worst thing I've seen on file is this guy viciously raped his 7-year-old and 9-year-old daughters and videotaped the whole stunt. Former federal correctional officer here. Had a guy that would grind glass, mix it with his fesses with urine, and gas officers with it. Had another that tortured, raped and murdered an underage girl. His murder and weapon he used to sodomize her? A flathead screwdriver. Had another inmate that poured boiling baby oil from a hot pot on another inmate as he slept, of which the inmate died after contracting gangrene after he was released from the burn unit. So suffice it to say I can't pick just one. One of my friends was in for manslaughter. I met him in there but he seemed like a pretty straight up dude. Did his own thing. WE. The night before this happened I was chilling with someone on my range in their cell. He was acting shifty, almost like he was prepared to leave the jail. He had all his stuff packed into garbage bags and said goodnight to all of us. He ended up rolling on someone at 7:30 AM the next day with 2 other people from different units. Too much traffic in the morning so guards can't really notice when outsiders from different units come onto their units. There was a lockdown and I haven't heard anything until someone fished me a message as to why we were on lockdown. My friend ended up getting jumped by 3 people. 2 stabbing him and 1 hitting him with a lock and a sock. We were on lockdown for just over a week and when we were released I started making a home brew in my cell. I ended up getting my cell searched and I went to kangaroo court that was sped up by my C4 because I was getting released in 2 weeks from a 2-year sentence. They put me in 1 week lockdown with no privileges but to eat. I was placed in my friend's cell which the other inmates did a crappy job of cleaning and had to sleep with his blood splattered all over the walls I was sleeping in. I was in county jail a year and a half awaiting trial, and there was this guy in AdSeg that was accused of sneaking into the homes of elder women at night and raping them after they fell asleep. He was convicted of the crime and sent to prison, where he was mysteriously poisoned though the official cause of death is unknown. Worst thing I know of was a dude who beat his cellie unconscious then raped him. The rapist only had like 2 years before he did that. I met a federal prisoner who loaned a man and son $100K for a business startup. Things went bad and the man and son didn't pay the guy back so he chopped the guy's head off, kidnapped the son, he was an adult, and tried driving from the east coast to the west coast to get rid of the headless body. Things take a turn when the son escapes and they catch the guy with the headless body in his trunk. I was in a juvenile facility that was more like a prison. It was even known as the Gladiator tank because guards were putting kids from rival gangs in the same area to fight against each other. The guards would watch. They were the most evil. Look up California Youth Authority if you're interested. I had many friends become completely institutionalized from their time there. Ages were 13-25. No place for a 13-year-old. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.